Hello, Paul.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good. Welcome back.
Hey,
Welcome back.
thanks, man. Thanks. I
Welcome
was
back
on
from your
an 8-day
meditation.
meditation retreat,
So
and yeah.
I was expecting you to be a lot more cheerful.
Do I seem not cheerful?
You seem a little bit angry.
Actually, that surprises me because I am angry, but I didn't think it was showing.
Only the people who know you and care for you the most.
Yeah, it's a tribute to our relationship that you just sense these things, right?
I think it's when you called me motherfucker back then that
Hey,
I
Paul,
detected that there was a little bit of it.
what happens before we tape stays before we tape, okay? Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. You're Paul Bloom, world-famous psychologist, writer, man of letters, publisher of the falsely modest newsletter, Small Potatoes. And you're going to carry this conversation since, after all, I was at a meditation retreat for 8 days with no contact with the world. I have no idea, was there a nuclear war? I don't know. I don't know anything. I mean, I tried to catch up. And you know what you learn when you come back from a meditation retreat? This is
Yeah.
the virtue of the old-fashioned physical newspaper. You can just go through that stack of New York Timeses in chronological order, look at the front page of each day, and you feel like, I'm still not ready for a conversation with Paul Bloom, but I'm closer. I'm closer.
I think that's what I would do. I often wonder what would happen if I did some time traveling and found myself 50 years in the future. It could be a machine, could be going into a coma, could be getting frozen. And I'd want to get up to speed. And I figure an excellent method would be to just go through New York Times, look at the covers, once a week, boom, 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 boom. And then over time, you just see a war starts, expands, this happens, that happens. That's what we'll do it.
It's like time lapse. Now, Paul, you're the psychologist, not me, so maybe it's not my place to ask this question. But you said I often imagine that I'm traveling ahead in time by 50 years. How often? How often, Paul?
Just, every once in a while. It's not an obsessive thought.
I shouldn't be worried about you.
You shouldn't be worried. You told me over email other things about me you're worried about, but no, this is okay. This is just a standard.
Okay.
Like, wouldn't you want to set yourself up the problem of you wake up, it's 50 years in the future. Okay, here's a question. You wake up 50 years in the future. You're being gently shooken awake. You're told, okay, you're coming out of this coma. Maybe we had you frozen because you were near death, but now we fixed you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? What's your first question?
Can I have some food?
No, you're fine. Here's some food, here's some water. What's your question? Is your question, are we
Then
still
there would be, can I have some sex? I'm trying to go ascend Maslow's I forget his hierarchy of needs. What's the direction you start? I guess I'm at the base level here, and I'm going the wrong direction.
In the history of people being woken from comas, I bet a lot do ask for water. I'm so thirsty. Water. Asking for sex is probably unusual.
Well, you know what happened? I was looking for things that have happened in the last couple of weeks that we might talk about that would give this a current eventsy flavor. And I happened upon, I'm explaining why sex was on my mind, which, by the way, It normally isn't. This is very unusual that the thought of sex would enter my mind. But I was reading this story in the Wall Street Journal from about 10 days ago that says Elon Musk's boundary blurring relationship with women at SpaceX. The subhead is the billionaire founder had sex with an employee and a former intern and asked a woman at his company to have his babies. And I read that with the thought that we might discuss it since it's a current events thing. And so that was kind of on my mind.
Okay.
Now, Paul, I would direct your attention to one sentence in this piece that really got my attention. One woman, a SpaceX flight attendant. So first of all, I didn't know there was such a thing, like they serve you coffee in space or something. But I digress. That's not my main question. One woman, a SpaceX flight attendant, alleged that in 2016, Musk exposed himself to her and offered to buy her a horse
that I remember.
In exchange for a sex act. Now, Paul, you cannot infer with complete confidence the order in which he did these things. But let me just tell you, based on my own experience, you should always offer the horse to buy the horse before you expose yourself, because otherwise they get the wrong idea. You know,
Yeah. Okay.
it's just a, just a thought I had. I mean,
Do I have to go with that? Okay.
I don't
Hey,
know.
this is
Yeah.
this is old news. People, the mine note. What she said. I figured she said she's an equestrian, and those horses are expensive, and
Oh.
you know, so it's more like you're with somebody and you want to do something nice for them.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody you can do, you give them a large sum of money. That's always nice. But if somebody said, I love to ride horses, and she said,
Mm-hmm.
and she may have even said, the horses I have are not, I love to ride an Olympics trained horse or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So just it was almost conversational. I'll buy you a horse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think maybe the journal left out some important context here. I think you're
Yeah,
right. And it's like, I think it's a tribute to him that he didn't just offer cash,
it's much
because that would have
classier.
been transactional. That would have been transactional and shown no sensitivity to her needs and the special things that make her the very special lady she is.
Yeah. And there was part of it where he offered some woman money to have children for him.
Yeah, well, that's different. I mean, if it's children, you can just pay cash, in my experience.
I'm not sure that that's strictly speaking legal.
Mm, well, it's
I
his
don't know.
company. It's his company. It's not publicly traded, is it? Is SpaceX a private company?
Wait, but SpaceX doesn't sell children. I mean, it's
Well, we don't know. It's his company. It can do it. I mean,
we are on icy legal grounds here.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Look, maybe we spent enough time on Elon, but he's always good for some commentary.
I don't think I still persist in saying that Elon has many gifts and many real strengths and many things we
mm,
should praise, admire, want our children to have. But
mhm.
also many problems. And I think one of his problems is his dealing with women throughout.
I get the impression from this article that he could have used a little tutelage on
Yes. Yes.
relationships with women. The look, it's what's amazing to me is that he can spend as much time as he does being crazy and being on his own little emotional roller coaster and still get all this shit done. He is amazing. I mean, not laudable on balance, I think, as a human being, but it is amazing because
Even the worst critics of Trump have to bow down to his extraordinary energy. He
for a man his age,
for a man of any
yeah.
age, that the rallies, the meetings, sleep seems to be unnecessary for him. Tremendous amount of energy, and you definitely see this with Musk. For me, I'm doing something like I'm starting to do a lot of work for this journal I edit, and I notice other parts of my life are suffering. Musk runs God knows how many corporations. He
Mhm.
runs Tesla. He runs SpaceX. He's doing the sort of leading a corporation which of this size, which is the sort of thing that would entirely overwhelm even the most ambitious of people. He does multiple corporations, and
No,
of course X.
yeah, X. He's worked wonders with X.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Elon.
Yeah.
Um, the but we know that in his case, we don't know this for sure in Trump's case that he's using drugs, right? In
Yes. In Elon's case, he's definitely using drugs.
fact, there's a line in this piece where he texts some young woman he'd like to come over and entertain him, and he says that if he doesn't come over, he thinks he'll just trank out, meaning I guess take a tranquilizer and go to bed. So what else is going on in the world? I mean, there's a lot of little things I thought that we could talk about.
You
You
sent me
know,
a
on a,
lot of little things. Yeah.
I did. You want a serious thing? This is serious and important. By the way, you didn't see my conversation with Steve Pinker, did you, or listen to
I
it?
saw it and listened to every word of it.
It's very valuable, didn't you think?
It was quite good. It was quite good. It was
Deeply insightful.
you had one a while ago that was more confrontational and maybe a bit less productive. But here you found he was unsympathetic to a lot of to some of your broader views. And I'm
Well,
not
it's
sure.
funny that he was, because I'm trying to salvage his whole view of the mind, or his whole view of AI strictly, and his whole view of the mind. I mean, and maybe I should explain quickly. Should I, or is this too arcane for this early?
No,
Should we
no,
postpone this? Well, I mean, here's the deal. The success of large language models is being taken by some people as vindication of a blank slate view of the human mind, right? Because it's like, hey, they don't come. I mean, the view of Steve and me and a lot of evolutionary psychologists had been that actually evolution built into us a lot of kind of hardware specific. I mean, you can call it hardware, you can call it like software. What is it they call the firmware? Firmware. You can call it whatever you want, but it's built in by natural selection. And it guides the learning process. So, for example, with language, we presumably have in our brains, like pre-programmed by evolution, the capacity to associate words with meaning, for example, and then to learn that, depending on which language we grow up with and so on. We have a means of representing the meaning of words somewhere in our brain. We don't know what it is, but it's an assumption of evolutionary psychologists that happens. And then they take these neural nets that the large language models are based on, and they just feed them a bunch of text and then do some, fine tuning with human feedback and so on. And they say, look, and then it knows how to use language in some sense. And they say, look, it started out with no special, hardware built in. It was a general purpose machine. So this shows you that you don't need all this hardware. And this vindicates the blank slate view of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's wrong, wrong, wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because what's going on during I would say especially the first phase, which some people, including Steve, call pre-training. Anyway, the part that's just training with the text, where it's just learning how to predict how sentences will proceed, when it is rewiring itself to get good at that, when it is establishing the so-called weights, that is giving value to all the, hundreds of billions of parameters or whatever, that is a kind of recapitulation of evolution. That's not just the recapitulation of a human being learning. Okay?
It could be.
Well, yeah, and let me tell you something. I would go further and say it almost must be. You can't tell me because we know that these large language models do, in the course of that pre-training and first phase, they develop a system for representing the meaning of words. We know what that system is. It involves a bunch of numbers and the location of a word in like high dimensional vector space or something. Mm-hmm. And you can't tell me that evolution, natural selection, didn't leave us with at least that much in the way of hardware, a means of representing the meaning of words. I think it's highly probable it did.
Yeah.
So I realize I'm kind of assuming my conclusion or something. There's something redundant about this logic, but this is my view. So, okay, stop me. Go ahead.
I agree with your conclusion. I think it's fully, in fact, I hold, Steve holds, and no accident. He was one of my advisors in graduate school, and together we made this argument that, following Chomsky, we have a large part of our capacity for understanding the world and understanding language is pre-wired in. We're different from chimps. We're different from rats. We're different from cockroaches, not just because we have a different environment, because our brains are configured differently. Mm-hmm. And if so, then you'd want to tell a natural selection story for how this got there, and how the capacity to represent language got there, how syntax and grammar got there. And I'm not sure whether or not the LLM story is a good model for how does natural selection work, because whatever happened that gave us the capacity for language, it wasn't being continually exposed to tokens of language.
Oh, that part is clearly kind of different.
So you need something else.
Well, okay. No, look, with an LLM, both things are going on at once. It's developing a system for representing the meaning of words, but it's also learning a specific language, which we know doesn't happen through evolution. We know, so it's doing these two things, and I'm certainly not saying that the mission, the training mission that evolution gives us is exactly like this. But I am suggesting that first of all, it is comparable to natural selection. In the sense that, look at evolution this way, okay? So it's like there's these two guys. One of them, and this brings us back to Elon Musk. This is good. Two guys. One of them says to this woman, do you want to have, can't finish the sentence, can't predict the next word. Then the other one goes, his brain is wired in such a way that he can finish it. And he says, do you want to have sex? Now, which guy's genes are going to get into the next generation, Paul? I'm actually not entirely kidding. The point is, obviously, the successful use of language furthers, helps your genes get into the next generation in all kinds of ways other than communicating with potential sex partners. But the point is, if you have a mutation that rewires your brain that makes you somewhat better in the manipulation of language, and that helps you get genes in the next generation, then that rewiring of your brain sticks. And that part of the training of a large language model holds as an analogy. That's the way it works. In other words, as you get, okay, did you succeed in predicting this word, or are you getting closer? Well, if it's getting closer, then the most recent change in the wiring of the neural network sticks. Okay? So, that's kind of the way it works.
I think some of that's true. I think what a good part of the evolutionary story for how we got to where we are now is we had a language community, and those of us who did better at using language reproduced more, understood better at comprehending it, or persuading, telling a good story. Maybe their sexual selection is a part in it. One way to charm mates, female or male, is to be good with language, a smooth talker. It's a good display of intelligence. It's good for communicating things. It's good for leadership. Totally. One important disanalogy, though, is that to tell the story of evolution of language in natural selection term, you have to start off with no language. There has to be some sort of situation where prior to language exists. And that's actually a very complicated problem. I believe it's a solvable problem, but you can't immediately start with text going back and forth, because
no, you don't start with text at all. But the other thing I'd say is the language, the complexity of the language, and Steve actually agreed on this part, is developing incrementally. The language, I'm imagining over 1 million or 2 years, human language is getting more complex with greater expressive power.
Right.
And so it's happening incrementally. And along with that, the brain is getting rewired to get better and better at manipulating complex language. So you can look at chimpanzees and see them doing rudimentary communication.
Yeah. But part of the problem, which is the part you're focusing on, is how do you get it from a rudimentary language, like a proto-language, all the way to full-blown languages, like the capacity to learn English or Dutch or Korean or whatever. And there, that sort of story you're telling of increased communications plays out. But the tough problem has always been, how do you get it from no language to proto-language?
Well, chimps have done that. All primates have done it. They have warning calls.
Yes. So how do you get from a no bee dance to a bee dance, from no warning calls to warning calls?
Well, this is a challenge generally. How do you get to an eyeball? Any complex organ, it's kind of challenging to imagine the incremental steps. And, Dawkins has written about this. All these people have written about it. And, we could get into that. But my point is, this is not a question about the evolution of language. This is a question about evolution.
I totally agree. But we don't have to solve it. We have to.
Well, but it's not just head-scratchingly puzzling to me. I mean, it is amazing. It is totally amazing. But Dawkins in one of his books takes on the eyeball as an example.
Yep.
The question is, what good is half a wing? What good is half a wing?
The wing case show that the natural selection can get you to a weak version of capacity where none existed. The question is how does it happen in communication systems? And communications have special problems. So one thing about a wing is, a crappy wing gives you some aerodynamic possibility. But for me to have a crappy signal, it's only any good at all if other individuals can comprehend it.
Well, first of all, let's start. Here's a scenario, and maybe we should put off some of this until overtime. But
wouldn't waste this on overtime.
Waste? You say we should put the good stuff in overtime? Is that your plan? Maybe you're right.
I don't know,
because that's what they're paying for.
The problem is it's all good.
It really is. We're humble guys, right? We wouldn't say that. It is with great reluctance that we declare that our product is a great product, right?
But let me just jump to another point where Steve did concede.
Well, quickly,
okay.
okay. You're like a primitive primate. You're surrounded by offspring and siblings who, by the way, share your genes.
Yeah.
You have a genetic mutation such that when you see a predator, you go, ah, and that gets their attention. And they look up and they see the predator and so they run away. That would actually thrive through evolution. It's a pretty simple mutation.
Yeah.
That's a start. And then once you've got, utterances, a second kind of utterance evolves. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
Do you think?
The one case, when people, and sometimes this happens because of bored podcasters, where they say, people ask you, what did you get wrong? Or what caused you to doubt your work? Or what could falsify you?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I tend to go for LLMs. Because, in fact, Steve gave almost the same answer, and I respected him for it, is that for a while, a lot of people, including me and Steve, were saying, language is not learnable. The abstract structural principles of language are not manifest in the input. So you need innate stuff to make you learn it. And to some extent, and I want to be cautious here, the LLMs are a counterexample to this very strong argument because they start with blank slates, you throw a lot of language at them, and now they know it. Now, that doesn't mean this is how kids do it. For one thing, they're exposed to billions or trillions of utterances. Kids get far fewer. And so it's possible that there's just two different ways to do it. But if you were to say, like Chomsky does, that you cannot get such and so rule in your language unless you have constraint B, in some way, LLMs are a counterexample to that.
But wait, I still say that all you need to get out of this slough, SLOUGH, of self-doubt, of doubting your prior assertions about built-in linguistic equipment, is to see the training process as to some extent recapitulating evolution. So I don't get it. I really don't get why Steve doesn't just jump on this bandwagon and say,
that doesn't make, because it doesn't make the argument go away. Here's another way of putting it. People like Steve would say a purely statistical machine chomping over data cannot give you the constraints of language. Impossible, cannot be done. And Chomsky still says that.
Wait, what do you mean by the constraints of language?
Well, suppose languages have an abstract constraint that say the syntax of grammatical syntax has to be hierarchical in a certain sort, or that there are constraints as to the sort of geometrical relationships between different parts of a sentence, or every language has a noun and a verb, which is particularly an agent. There's this phonological constraint of a sound, the sort of things linguists study for a living. Now, what people would argue is it's not learnable. There's none of the positive information in the world could give you this. But the LLMs take positive information and they spit out the grammar.
Well, that's because, I think there's actually some evidence.
And you could be right and say, well, yeah, sure, but in the real world, it's more of an evolutionary model. That's fine. But it does directly provide the exact counterexample case.
Only superficially. Why could not the machines during the training process be constructing syntactic rules? And I think there's some evidence that they do, as well as constructing a system for representing the meaning of words.
Because they didn't start, because they'd have to be constructing them. And the argument that
that's what evolution does. That's what evolution does. It constructed them. In your own view, evolution constructed them, right?
Yes.
And I'm saying this is an evolutionary process that constructs them.
Well, put it this way. Suppose somebody was to say, it's not evolution at all. It's straight out learning. You have a kid has an LLM in their head. They hear a lot of language, and now they know the grammar. Absent the differences, forgetting about all sorts of differences that make them implausible, if that's right, then that's a real counterexample to Chomsky view. That says all you need.
If it happened with kids, it would be. It doesn't happen with kids.
So the question would be now, which people are studying, is what if you take an LLM, a total blank slate LLM, you give it the same language your child got when she was a kid, your children got a kid, and then the LLM popped out English of the type that your children speak. Now, all of a sudden, you get to say evolution, but it then becomes perfectly parsimonious to say that's how kids do it.
Mm, I'm not sure I follow that. I mean, if you expose it, if you took as the training text every sentence your kid hears, uh, from the age of 0 to
Yeah.
20 or something, that would probably be enough text to train them on. But it wouldn't be the kind of learning process a kid's undergoing. It would be this predict the next word, unsupervised reinforcement thing,
Well,
self-supervised.
put it this way. Here's the hypothetical. Suppose
Yeah.
I say, Chomsky's wrong, Pinker's wrong, Bloom's wrong. Language learning just associates this statistics. And you say, well, I'll prove that. I don't believe that. He says, well, okay, we took a little robot, we stuck an LLM into it, we talked to it exactly as gave it the same input a normal child would get. And just through the simple dumb LLM, it started to say, me want cookie and gaga goo goo and so on. And then gradually started to talk just like a person did. If that were true, then by any standard of how one makes arguments, I guess that's how kids do it. I'm not
I
saying
think I
it's
missed
true.
something. I apologize. I actually missed part of your thought experiment. I mean, you could run it over quickly, but it's up to you. I lapsed thinking of the next thing I was going to say.
I often do that. Um,
It's a problem when you're on a podcast. I mean, we're working without an ed here, man.
if you took a child and an LLM next to it,
Mm-hmm.
and you fed them both the same input, and they
Mm-hmm.
came out with the same output,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody said, hey, you know how children learn language? The same way an LLM does it. That's not a bad argument. That means in fact, that's a really powerful argument. It's supported by the fact that your theory that the kids have an LLM in their
Mm-hmm.
head gave rise to the same.
Yeah. It would be a plausible conjecture. It wouldn't be an airtight argument. In any event, we know that kids don't learn it that. I mean, kids have parents who point to things and say, apple.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's no explicit connection of words to meaning in the training of an LLM.
Yeah.
And for that matter, I mean, I'm not saying you know what? You remind me of the foreign policy establishment, Paul. You and Steve Pinker remind me of the foreign policy establishment. I try to help. I try to give you insights that can save the day. What happened? What do? You turn your back. I don't get. I mean, if you guys aren't embracing this, I mean, where do I turn? I'm trying to vindicate your seemingly endangered worldview. Who is going to understand what I'm saying? This is the misery of being me.
I feel we should talk about your meditation retreat.
Yes,
is it possible you went to the wrong place or something?
Well, meditation retreats are always emotional roller coasters, and only people who've been on them understand this irony. Well, you're rolling your eyes. What? Why?
I have not been on a meditation retreat.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean only the people who don't have the courage to. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put it that way. I'm just saying. It seems ironic. It's like meditation retreat. People come back to meditation retreats with these stories like, "Oh my God, on the second night I thought this," and and people are like, "Why do they call them retreats? Why don't they call them like attacks or something?" It sounds like this was very painful, but that's the way it is. But mine ended on a pretty good note. I am a better person than I was when I went in. You should have seen me the day I went in.
Okay.
It was bad.
Look, in the sense of people who meditate a lot, some people who meditate a lot are real pieces of work. But the question you have to ask is, what would they be like if they didn't meditate?
Right, exactly. And there's evidence of this. There's part of me on the record. There's parts of me before I ever went to a meditation retreat.
We can watch a clip of you pre-meditation, sort of.
Actually, I had been on a retreat before. Anyway,
you had been on a retreat before, by the way. I know you want to save this for the good part of this, but you had been. I read about this in Buddhism and history. This part you remember, where you became suffused with bliss.
Mm-hmm.
Did that happen again?
Of that this time.
You got some of that?
Yeah, that is a fairly reliable outcome. But it's not that easy to sustain it after you leave the retreat. I mean, you almost wouldn't want to, but.
And if I could come in for the third day, would I just get this effusion of bliss, or do I have to?
No. You have to go through the first couple of days of hell.
Okay.
I mean, especially if you're not a meditator. But let me just say one thing that I thought about it a slightly different way this time. What's amazing is the way, like it's almost like the default state of the human mind is to see the beauty in the world. And what I mean by that is like if you just get your mind to quit thinking and it it enters something like a state of equanimity and peace and rest, everything looks beautiful. It's like you're on drugs. It's amazing. And in fact, it's like an incremental thing. I was doing walking meditation, and this is actually in a way interesting for people to easier for people to fool around with than sitting meditation. Okay, just walk slowly and try to be conscious of your foot making contact with the surface every single time. And once you get where you can do that, try to remain conscious, like, okay, left foot goes down, you're conscious of the contact, then be conscious of the right foot coming up and moving and going down and the contact that's making. In other words, keep your consciousness like in your, in the walking process the whole time. And what's amazing, and this is more dramatic on a meditation retreat when you're already kind of getting in the zone, but is just like, it's literally like doing that successfully for 10 to 12 steps on a retreat. And then you look up at the flowers and they're brighter than they were before you did it. I'm not kidding. It's just like taking a little more of a drug because you're stilling your mind a little more. It's amazing. You should go on a retreat, Paul. You're a psychologist.
I've tried to meditate.
Yeah, I know. I did too before I went on retreat. Didn't work.
I've tried to meditate for 5 minutes. It's very long.
Well, that's obviously not going to work. Unless you're just unless you're the kind of person who doesn't need to meditate in the first place.
No, I've listened to Headspace. I've tried to listen to Sam Harris. This is
Paul.
the thing. I just a whole retreat. I would like.
See, again, I try to help. Do they listen? No.
I know.
I try to help.
I know.
It gets frustrating after a while.
Also, do I need it? Maybe I'm grounded enough.
You said you go to a therapist.
I do. Is this a replacement? Could be cheaper.
Yeah, you would have to elaborate on what you. We'll do that in overtime. We'll get into the details of your therapy.
My psychological problem.
Yeah,
Bob, do you realize that this is Ask Me Anything Day?
It is. It is.
So it is and it isn't, because we said we would do it and we never followed up. We never put things on Twitter. I put something on Twitter late last night. Not many responses. I put something. So maybe what we should do is announce here that we're going to talk about some of the questions we received, but also we're going to invite people for our next one to send us questions.
Yeah. You got
Twitter, email, Substack. I got a few.
You got a pretty good response from just doing it on Twitter. We have a few questions that we can entertain in overtime, and maybe even before that. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about. We can talk about dark matter. We can talk about the Rory McIlroy tragedy. It's really sad. We could talk about. Yeah,
I could ask you the first question we got, which is directed towards you. It's a very good question.
Okay.
You wrote Nonzero, what, 25 years ago?
More or less, 24.
How, in any way, has your views changed since then?
Not dramatically. I mean, I would say, in one way, I mean, there are things I would change and that I think have not been entirely vindicated. But I would say one thing's been vindicated, I think. I said, look, relations among nations are becoming more and more non-zero sum. That means you either develop more and more in the way of international governance, moving toward global governance, and of course that entails like respect for international law and so on, or the world starts spiraling into a hellhole. Well, that prediction has been borne out. The world did not follow my advice in terms of building. It looked good for a while. I will say it looked good for a while, but in the end, it all fell apart. And I mean, for example, like right now, the World Trade Organization is paralyzed. The formerly effective adjudicatory mechanisms are in decay. The U.S. has violated the charter of the UN so often that finally Russia decided to start violating it and invading countries. So it's all, and I'm serious about this. I mean, like the world, again, it's like I'm trying to help Paul. Did they listen? No. The world did not take my advice, and the world is in a worse place, much less promising place than it was 25 years. That, I would argue seriously, is the case. Now, things I would change a little, I would emphasize more the power differentials that come into play in non-zero sum games. I mentioned that, but I think some people took me as saying that global governance is this inherently good thing along all dimensions and brings justice and so on. And actually, no. I mean, justice is something you have to work to bring into the system because a non-zero sum relationship, there's usually a bargaining dimension, right? Like when you buy a car, there is some price. There's a range of prices at which it's in your interest to buy the car and their interest to sell it. So there is not potential non-zero sumness, but within that range, you want to bargain. And, but within that range, it's zero sum between the lowest price, it's in their interest to sell it for, and the highest price, it's in your interest to buy it for. And power matters. Like if you have more options, if you have a lot of places you can buy the car at various prices, that's power. And I wish I'd emphasized that more. The things like the International Monetary Fund. It's true that it's non-zero sum if the IMF is loaning money to some country, but it's also true that if the other country doesn't have anywhere else they can get the money, and they're in a very needy situation, they can't be too picky about the terms. That may seem like a little thing. The bigger thing, it's not, but the bigger thing is, I was among those who was hopeful that, especially in, digital age, in the current, that, economic liberty, that free market economics would tend to bring a certain amount of political loosening, political liberty. So economic engagement with China by helping to draw them into a free market system would make them more politically liberal. Economic liberalism often brings political liberalism. I would say that, first of all, it would be nice if that's the case. If it's not the case, I would still stick with most of my prescriptions. But the other thing I'd say is I think the jury is kind of still out. I mean, the mechanism I posited is that it's not like it foists political liberalism on anyone. It's just that if they want to really maximize prosperity, then it's going to be hard for them to reconcile great prosperity in the long run with extreme political illiberalism. And, that's a process. I mean, like right now, we're hearing that because Xi has clamped down, that looked pretty good for the first 10 years of the millennium. But then with Xi in particular, he's gotten more authoritarian domestically. And I'm starting to read that American companies are more reluctant to do business with him, to build plants there and so on. So he may pay a price for this. We'll see. And I'm not quite ready to give up on there being any connection at all between those two things. I can't believe that was very interesting to many people. But you asked.
I always thought your view had a sort of cultural evolution notion baked into it, where the idea would be it's not biological evolution, but the idea is that if you're right and say some sort of political liberalism of whatever sort is good for a country, then some countries will adopt it and others won't. The ones that adopt it will do better. And
Mhm.
they'll either dominate or eat up or be emulated by the ones who don't. And pretty soon everybody is politically liberal just because it works. And it's in some way like an advantageous gene spreading through a population.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one reason that Western Europe kind of jumped ahead of the world for a while. Western Europe, unlike China, unlike the Islamic Empire, was a bunch of distinct polities competing with one another, the nation states. And so you had this competitive ferment. Uh, and, looking at what's working for this one country and adopting it and so on. Whereas you didn't have a lot of, little zones of experimentation in the same way within the larger empires. Um, yeah, cultural evolution. A lot of the book is about the dynamics of cultural evolution. Yeah. So what was yeah,
You said you thought the world has gotten worse in the last 25 years. Is that
yeah.
true? I mean, if it's 23 years, you're comparing us to 9/11.
Well, I mean, 9/11, I mean, in the scheme of things was a blip. I mean, if we hadn't overreacted, I mean, that's another case where I laid out the prescription very clearly right after the event. And the fact people are probably starting to think I'm mentally ill, which
No,
it's possible.
no.
But I did say right after 9/11, I laid it out, 10-part series in Slate about how to fight a war on terrorism. And I said, don't trust your retributive instinct. I said that like a week after 9/11.
But
And
do you think the world's gotten worse in the last 25 years in the ways that you're interested in?
um, I think things look less auspicious and promising. I mean, the trend lines are in a bad direction. I think. I mean, look. One way to put it is, threats that I pointed to at the time, like biological weapons, pandemics, and other people pointed to. Virtually no progress has been made on the international regulation of these things, and they ultimately have to be subject to international regulation. No country can be safe until all countries are being monitored. That, if we didn't learn that from at least the possibility that there was a lab leak, which clearly is at least a possibility, if we didn't learn that we need to get serious about the international regulation of biotech, we're in trouble. And you know what? We didn't learn it. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody. They're talking about having a fucking Cold War with China. So that this kind of thing will be less likely. It's hopeless. It's hopeless. I mean, no, it's not hopeless. But I mean, I should go back I should go to another meditation retreat, Paul. I'm off tomorrow.
I feel, yeah, you seem very stressed out. Understandably, look, the way I see it is it's like massage. You go for a nice massage, you feel great, but then a day later, you actually feel much worse than before because your body was all loose and unprepared for the rigors of life. And now the rigors of life are hitting you.
Right. Well, that's why meditation can be a thing you're addicted to, which is good if it is.
Yeah. That's not one of my many addictions.
No, and you're going to share some of those in overtime. But first, before we go into overtime, do you want to answer one of the many questions that was asked of you?
Sure. Yeah, hit me with one. Or do you have them in front of you?
Let's see. I don't want to talk about ASMR. I forget what the letters stand for, but I know what the thing. I think that's people who like listening to these white noisy things, like the sound of like paper tearing, or these. It's like a subculture. But here's a guy who says, question for Paul Bloom: what do you, as a psychologist, have to say about free will? Thanks. I'm just going to preface your answer by saying, what am I, chopped liver? I don't get a view on free. Okay, anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
You said a whole question. How come nobody wants to know how my view on against empathy has changed?
How you would rewrite Nonzero if you were rewriting?
Actually, that was one of the questions in there was, and what does Paul think about Nonzero? to include me.
They just
So
threw you a bone, man.
that's right. That's so pathetic. Um,
So free
uh,
will. Paul's going to sell free will, and then maybe we'll go into over.
I
Unless
think
we can think of something else.
I
to
think no matter
address.
what I say about free will, you're gonna want to jump in. My view on free will is kind of a sort of standard compatibilist view. So, it's a determined universe. If what it is to be free is that you could have done something else, there's no such thing as free will because, it's either all preordained or there's some quantum indeterminacy, and who cares about that? So, the determinists are right. However, there's a perfectly sensible notion of free will and choice and responsibility and morality that just falls upon normal fact, that the sort of undeniable fact that we do make choices. We balance options, we give them costs and benefits, we deliberate over them, and so on. And even if this is a determined process, it is a different from a random process, or different from a process where we just choose unconsciously, or so on. So, I chose to be on this podcast. I sort of weighed it out and everything like that. I'm responsible for what I do here. I should be blamed or credited. If instead somebody gave me a drug that made me go, that'd be different. The cases are equally determined in the metaphysical level, but there's a real normal notion of choice. It just isn't, it just doesn't violate determinism. And there's a nice line by Dan Dennett here, a nice analogy by Dan Dennett, which is, he says, look, a physicist will tell you that time has very different properties than you might think it does. But you don't respond to that by saying, wow, there's no such thing as time, scientists have shown. I think that's right. Similarly, a good metaphysician, thinking hard about these things, will tell you that choice and decision-making have very different properties than you would have thought it did, but you don't give up the notions of choice and decision-making free will. That's where I stand.
Yeah, you are a compatibilist. Yeah,
I'm a compatibilist. By the way, just to connect it to another fascinations, I expressed this view in a debate with Deborah. I think her name is Deborah Fried, who is the mother of Sam Bankman-Fried, and there was a public debate over her views on free will. And
when was this? Pre-scandal?
Pre-scandal in the Boston
Wow.
Review. Fried wrote an article about moral responsibility, basically saying that nobody's responsible for anything. And I chimed in with her response, and she wrote a response to me. This is so all of our themes connect together.
They do. Plus, this will lead naturally into our discussion of the Apple TV show
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter.
Yeah.
Which is very much about paths not taken.
Are you totally up to date on that?
What?
I'm
totally up on.
Me too.
I'm up to date on the show.
Yeah.
So you are a compatibilist. Dan was a compatibilist. And by the way, the New York Times got this kind of wrong in the obit. They said he denied the existence of free will or something. And maybe at some point he did, but by the end of his life, he was a compatibilist, which is to say that, yes, there is in a meaningful sense free will. Now, I think that's total bullshit. Compatibilism doesn't make any sense to me. I'm closer to Deborah Fried. And my view is, the intersection between my view and compatibilism is, yes, we have to act as if there is free will. We have to, as a practical matter, hold people responsible for their behavior, put evildoers in jail, reward good behavior. That is a smart way to set up society, but it is never just for anyone to suffer. In other words, retributive justice is not a moral good in and of itself. Its only moral defense is in its effect on the future behavior of the miscreant and of any other people in society who observe the punishment. That, I think, is what Deborah Fried would probably say, right?
Yep.
I'm with her.
I'll also just add, this is just as a way of bringing two of my friends together. Your view on this, and on some other things too, is
I know who you're about to mention.
Stunningly close.
To Sam Harris's.
You are both obsessed with meditation and meditation retreats. You have both told me I needed to meditate. And you both have exactly the same hardcore view on free will.
and yet we hate each other.
Sam says that if you truly deny free will, there's no room for hate.
He's got a funny way of showing it. I didn't block him on Twitter. Listen, it's funny. Buddhism, this is actually pretty Buddhist. Buddhism is kind of implicitly deterministic and is not big on retributive justice. I mean, Buddhist ethics. I don't mean
Actual
I'm not
Buddhist.
talking about the way, so much we could talk about, but I think it's about time to go into overtime where we can talk about this Dark Matter show, which I kind of like.
That show's been doing really well. And I also want to very briefly say something about Presumed Innocent, the TV series.
Oh, I have not watched that. I want to talk. I want to talk a little about this Anthropic paper, Anthropic, the AI company, on the location of concepts in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's a couple weeks old, but I haven't talked to you about it. And let's see, what else is there? I mean, there are other questions for you. Oh, somebody want to know your thoughts, or maybe mine too, on B.F. Skinner. Maybe, I mean, we don't want to address all the big questions at once. That's certainly related to free will.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we ran out of time, the Roy McIlroy tragedy is just really eating at me. So sad. Oh, and I want to, if I have time, something about the three body problem that's still eating at me, which is where I think, well, I had said, I would say, I think they have the concept of entanglement wrong in terms of its implications. I'm reasonably confident in that. Quantum entanglement.
Maybe we should have 2 paid tiers. Just one just for regular stuff. And we get into quantum entanglement, you have to pay an extra $20 a month, and that's the heavy stuff.
Yeah. Or many worlds.
Many worlds.
Many worlds is the first tier, and then entanglement, because many worlds is dark matter. And then entanglement is the second.
But I'm thinking of a many worlds paywall, where a virtually infinity of different worlds in which you pay different amounts to be with us.
That's a great idea.
And some of them will replace with other people, and some of them you yourself could come in and talk with us.
That's a great idea. The first quantum podcast.
Think about auctioning off space for the paper.
This is the marketing breakthrough we've been waiting for. Final thought. I think it's so cool that the Washington Post is having a preemptive mutiny.
So I looked at that very briefly. They're angry about somebody.
Well, so they brought in this British, this new publisher, who I guess is British, this guy, something Lewis. And he brought in Will Lewis, and he's bringing in as the next editor, Rob Winnett, who's also, they're both, I think, in the Rupert Murdoch kind of network loosely, and in the British Journalism Network. And so the Winnett guy, Lewis hired Winnett to be the editor, of the Washington Post, but he hasn't showed up yet. And so the Washington Post is running these things about what a shit he is. And other newspapers have run, the New York Times, NPR, and the Washington Post have run pieces raising questions about the ethics of either Will Lewis or Rob Winnett or both. And to some extent, it's just different. It's about the different ethical rules governing British and American journalism. But to some extent, it's about the possibility that these guys are sleazes.
So the cliche about British journalism, particularly as it relates to Murdoch, is it's a little bit more rough and tumble, a little bit more.
They're less obsessed with
rules and
in terms of how you get a hold of information, and arguably with factual accuracy. Although I have to admit that's setting the bar pretty low. To be less obsessed with it than some American
as a non-journalist, somewhat mixed feelings. So I think it's terrible when you hack into people's phones to get nude pictures of them. Seems criminal and terrible and everything like that. On the other hand, if a reporter in some way breaks a few rules, cuts some lines to track down enormous government corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that kind of good? Aren't they the heroes in the movies I tend to watch?
Well, that's the British argument.
Yeah.
That the ends justify the means or something. But I mean, in some cases, we're talking about breaking the law.
Would the law stop you from really cracking a great case?
Oh, depend on what it was. If it's like I don't know, if they're holding a bunch of kids in a basement,
Yeah, exactly.
I break the law.
You break the law. That's right.
But but probably you would be vindicated by the courts in that case somehow.
Yeah.
Citizen's arrest. I'd make a citizen's arrest.
In fact, there's great traditions of journalists refusing to name their sources, even as they languish in prison for that.
Yeah, and often I think in some cases the courts have respected that. But you're right, that is the case. Well, look, Paul, while we still have the energy to be super, super entertaining, I think we should head into overtime.
Okay. Looking forward to this.
And so, yeah. Well, you know how people can get this valuable content, Paul? They can subscribe to one of two. They can become paid subscribers to one of two newsletters. Can you name those newsletters?
One, the bigger one, the more famous one, is Nonzero podcasts, Nonzero community.
It's the Nonzero newsletter, which includes the podcast.
Newsletter.
Yes. And the other, should I say it?
Used to say it.
Is Small Potatoes, the one that's run by Paul Bloom. Now, that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to get back into the whole IP, abuse of rabbis question. I just Paul Bloom's Small Potatoes newsletter on the Substack platform. Paid subscription to either of these will get you this wonderful content. But if you can't do that, rate and review us. What are we asking for? Smash the like button?
Smash the like button, I guess.
Yeah. Smash the like button. Yeah.
I don't think I have a YouTube presence.
You do now.
I guess I do now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rate us on Apple Podcasts.
Right.
Sign up on Patreon. All the things I've heard on my many podcasts.
Yes, some of which don't actually apply to us, but still, it's great that you know how to say them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you're really making progress. That's
right.
Good.
Right. Mark us on Insta. Snapchat.
Yeah, do that. Follow us. Follow me on Instagram, where I do have an account on Instagram. You could do that, but nobody ever has. But you could.
Okay, I have a question. I can say this. I was doing Twitter, and great. So I got like 95,000 followers on Twitter, just gradually accumulating. About 2 years ago, it stopped, and I'm totally locked in. It goes up a bit. And I feel when I post something, it doesn't go anywhere. Now I've been posting less, but I feel like I don't feel like Elon Musk got mad at me and put me on a list, but I feel I've somehow run afoul of the algorithm.
I can answer that question in overtime, Paul. So all the people having the same problem you're having, I'm the man you want to listen to. Okay. But you will have to get to the other side of the paywall for that, I'm afraid.
Here we go.